Hey there, and welcome back to Modern World History, where we are continuing to discuss the European exploration period, and we've already looked in the first video for this unit at Portugal. Today, right now, we're going to look at the Spanish Empire. So, if you remember correctly, we were talking about how Portugal had discovered a direct trade route to India, and the Spanish were super jealous. They sent Christopher Columbus, or commissioned him, and paid for him to go across the Atlantic, where he discovered the Americas. And so we're going to leave off there, or we're going to pick up there, rather, and talk a little bit about that. So we're looking at the Spanish Empire now, and under Columbus, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria were the three ships that made up his fleet, if you will, that was the first Columbus voyage. Now remember, we talked about the motivations for the motivations for exploration, okay? And it was God, glory, gold. Motivations. Alright? So these are here kind of like the motivations. We talked about how this one here is the most important. And the glory in this point is that he wanted to claim the land for Spain. The monarchs wanted to have glory for controlling all this land and getting all this gold. And Columbus wanted his name in the history books. And God is going to be, as we mentioned in the first video, the justification for this stuff. Okay? The justification. So, Columbus, as you can see right here, sailed for Spain, and the Spanish intended to compete with Portugal, alright, in order to, I guess, gain the most wealth, gain the most gold, gain access to the most spices, and benefit from being able to control that trade. Remember that the Spanish at this point thought that they were in the East Indies, or in other words, they were in Asia, but they were not. They were in the Caribbean. So Columbus also went on a second voyage, as not as a explorer, but as an empire builder. He returned with a real fleet, not just three ships, but he had an actual fleet with him. And his motivation this time around was to establish colonies. All right, as you can see here, I've already underlined it. So he wanted to establish colonies on behalf of the Spanish crown. So now, real quick, what in the world are we talking about? We've heard this word colony before, but when we mention colony, what we mean is land controlled by a distant sovereign nation. So in other words, looking at territory that is kind of taken, that might have other people living in it, and this land is going to be controlled by, in this case, the king of Spain, or the monarchs of the Spanish crown. Other explorers also want in on the action in this case, and so you've got other people beginning to explore for other countries here. So Pedro Alvarez Cabral is he discovers Brazil, or goes and explores a lot of the lands around Brazil. Amerigo Vespucci was actually the individual who America was named after. He was an Italian that went on several voyages, not so much as a explorer, but as a writer, and he wrote about a lot of what he saw, and wrote about what the land was like, what the natives were like, and things like this. And people began to read about this and associated the Americas with the writings of Amerigo Vespucci. And so there you have that. And Magellan, who was also sailing for the Spanish, his crew was the first to circumnavigate the Earth, which means, in this case, go all the way around. So go around the Earth. Now, Magellan was not one of the ones to do this, okay? His crew did it, and really what was left of his crew, because Magellan and, like, the vast majority of his ships and of his crew perished on the voyage while doing this, alright? So they really got wrapped up in a dispute in the Philippines, and many of them didn't come out from that. And so only one ship and a fraction of his crew actually was able to return, but nevertheless he got his glory, as he was the first one to do this, and is now in the history books as the one who did this. Now there's also these conquistadors, all right, and conquistador is a word for conqueror. It's a Spanish word for conqueror. And these were guys who were out searching for gold and glory. And so they're going to be the Spanish conquistadors, they were going to conquer some of these large empires that were discovered in the American mainland, mainly in Central and South America. And so, probably one of the most important, or the one you're going to be more likely to hear about, is Hernan Cortez. Hernan Cortez was looking for gold. He was also looking for glory, obviously. And he was going to be the one who conquered the Aztec Empire. And this ended up being a major gold payout. He really raked it in. So, giving you a little bit of context here, Hernan Cortez went somewhat illegally from a station in Cuba to the American mainland in Mexico, and began to take his very small group of individuals with him into the mainland, and discovered some of the natives that were really at odds with the Aztecs. All right, so the Aztecs made them pay tribute. Tribute is like if you talk about tribute, is a tax for usually called a tax for protection. All right, but they did not feel very protected by paying this tax. They felt like they were forced as an act of obedience to pay this tax to the Aztecs, as usually this is the case with tribute. And so, after Cortez used guns to blow up a lot of the natives and put down any acts of aggression against him and his people, he ends up realizing that these people hate the Aztecs, and many of them joined him. And to make matters even more in favor of Cortez here, the Aztecs believed that he could be the god Quetzalcoatl. And they have images of a bearded individual they interpret him as having pale skin, coming from the Eastern Ocean or something. It's just unbelievable. Even in the same year as the legend as when Cortez arrived. It's just a huge stroke of random luck here. They didn't know how to handle interactions with Cortez. Eventually, they tried to put him down, but Cortez had infiltrated the Aztec capital and had gone in and taken Montezuma II as somewhat of a hostage, and the people turned on Montezuma. Eventually, Cortez gets out and goes back with a larger force and conquers the Aztecs. And then, obviously, disease and all these things we're going to talk about. Another big empire that was taken by conquistador was the Inca Empire, taken by Francisco Pizarro. And it's, again, kind of the same story. You got these Europeans, a very small group for the most part, compared to the natives they're conquering. But they have gunpowder. So I'm actually going to write this over here on the side. When you have guns, and guns are going to be cannon, they're going to be rifles, all right. And also another thing too that they had that the natives had never seen before was horses, and they thought these guys here, they thought horses were monsters. They couldn't differentiate the horse from the rider. They thought they were just one big monster, and they were terrified. So when you got cannons blowing you up, you're coming at people with spears and sticks and no armor or anything like that, and people are coming at you with horses and that you think are monsters, and they have cannons and rifles. Of course, you're gonna be terrified, and you're probably not gonna come out on top on this. So, and these are the things. Cortez and Pizarro had guns and horses. I already mentioned this here, even though I wrote it over here on the side as well. So you get it twice. The natives had never seen either one of them. They thought Cortez was a god. Cortez had thousands of native allies who hated Aztecs because of the tribute we just mentioned. All right, and there were different rules of engagement. Here's what I mean by this is that the Native Americans, the Aztecs in this case, they were looking for captured soldiers because they made sacrifices to their gods, and they got honored greatly for being able to take in a hostage or someone that they could sacrifice. So the Europeans were just like, kill everyone with our big guns and horses, whereas the Aztecs and many of the natives in that area were, let's capture these guys, let's bring them in alive so we can sacrifice them. So you had different rules of engagement. There need to be quotation marks right there as well. Now here's the thing too, the diseases, this is the big thing, because if you don't remember any of this other stuff, the thing that struck the natives the most is these diseases that Europeans brought with them. Smallpox, measles, you name it. Diseases that the Europeans had dealt with for many years and had started to build up some degree of immunity to. Well, these natives had never experienced these diseases. They never had gone there. A lot of these diseases were caused by close encounters, I guess, living closely with animals that didn't exist in the Americas. And so in 1500 you had 25 million Native Americans. By 1600, only 100 years later, that number is reduced to only 1 million. So this here is also part of the reason why the Europeans were able to go in and just do as they please. So Spanish, obviously, they're going to impose their culture on the natives. A lot of this is going to be in the form of religion, God, glory, and gold. So this here is going to be the God part. Okay, God, glory, and gold. And there also ended up being a particular kind of class or social structure, if you will. So you've got mestizos, and you've got peninsulares, who well, the mestizos are going to be a mix between Spanish and the Native Americans. Peninsulares are going to be people who are natively from Spain and moved in. So the way this works is that most of your conquistadors were men. They wanted to settle down in these Spanish colonies and have families. They had to mix together with some of the native women. And so you end up seeing these new class structures. And mestizos are going to be the children of their Spanish and native offspring. All right, and then you also got religion and language. Obviously, we just mentioned this. Now, here's another thing too. Oh, by the way, I don't want to gloss over this idea here of the language. Today in Central and South America, the vast majority of people there speak Spanish. All right, the vast majority speak Spanish. And in Brazil, all right, they speak Portuguese. So the languages being spoken in these areas today are a direct influence of this age of exploration when the Spanish and the Portuguese settled down. Also, in terms of religion, most of the world's Catholics today live in Central and South America. There's more Catholics there than anywhere else in the world. So Spanish language and Catholic Christianity are both a product of the diffusion of culture that occurred, but during this time of exploration when the Spanish and the Portuguese arrived in Central and South America. Now, to kind of finish up looking at Spain, I wanted to talk about the encomienda program. It was a policy of basically legalizing slavery of the Native Americans. And they had permission from the crown to do this so long as they were not going to be mean or mistreating the Native Americans. Obviously, there's no way to police that, and so it was done. But unfortunately for the Spanish, if you're going to consider it like that, these Native Americans were not good laborers, and there were several reasons. One, they knew nothing about European farming. They never used animals, so any kind of agriculture that they did was manual labor. There were no pack animals or any animals that could help with labor, and so these Native Americans didn't hold out well because they didn't know what to do. Also, and probably mainly, they didn't stand up against European diseases. They had no idea. They didn't have the immunities in order to live. So they would catch measles and smallpox, as we already talked about. Many of them had died due to these diseases anyway. And so the Native Americans didn't make good laborers. And so what happens here is, as fate would have it, the Portuguese, who kind of controlled the African coast, began to pay for captured Africans that they would then sell to Europeans to move over to the Americans in order to perform some of this forced labor and be these slaves. And so you start to see the beginning of the triangular trade, the Middle Passage, the slave trade, as you have heard about it, begins to happen. This is not the invention of slavery, but this is definitely the beginning of the forced enslavement of Africans being brought to the Americas. So, in the next video, we talk about North American colonization. See you then.